from the very beginning I was interested in abstraction. I'm not sure why. Sometimes I think I was a frustrated painter with a attention disorder, and photography was very appealing in that for photography a 30th of a second was a long time. But I always saw those surfaces from the first time I had a camera in my hand, and thought about the painting that I had grown up with and looked at the contemporary sort of aesthetic, and was seeing it everywhere, seeing it on every wall and seeing texture and color, and so it became something I was always interested in, and secondly it became a subject matter that taught me how to compose imagery in that rectangle, and using architecture and lines and those proportions that were created by where you put the camera were very important to me in terms of seeing the world through that rectangle.
Yes, that's right. That's what I saw from the very beginning. Because I don't think of an abstraction as independent of portraiture, because what makes any work aesthetically interesting to me is the formal properties it has, which is what we're talking about right now. So I tried to make the case that painters have been doing this since the beginning. They'd say, oh yeah, there's this face I've got to do, it's a king or a queen, but boy, the robe. And there'll be great patches of the painting. There's nothing but rolling blue, or, and they know what they're doing. Well, I started out being a tremendous snob about the visual. Not the paintings, but photography, especially influenced or whatever by movies. And I just, everybody raving about these movies, and they're just amusement stuff. So I was a superior. And it sort of spilled over into photography. I wasn't paying attention and snubbing it. But then I started using photography a little for my classes, because I could demonstrate some principles immediately without talking about it much, that the students would say, oh yeah, that's right. And started to take, and my career began to send me more often away, like a tourist to another town, so I had my little camera. Mary was becoming an architect, so everything was moving in that direction. And then when I one day looked at a bunch of junk on the floor of those silos in here in Midtown, sort of, vacant, empty now, right around that area there are a bunch of railroad tracks and stuff, and I would go there, and I had a photograph, and I looked at it and I thought, wait a minute, that is art. And boy, after that, I was trying. So I tried to improve the quality, and it was very interesting, because at first, if I did anything that was look good at all, and after a while, some years, I started to work with Michael, and then I stopped doing a lot of the photographs because I could see the distance, and I wasn't interested, as I would be if I learned to play an instrument or something. I wasn't interested in doing the photography unless I could do it well. wasn't just an idle. I hate idle hobbies anyway. As Carlos Fuentes taught me this, when you're traveling in a strange city, don't look just at the windows and the doors on the ground floor, because those will have been done over dozens of times. It's the upper floors, and Egypt is Cairo is full of upper floors. I mean, some of the most remarkable I've ever seen of Art Nouveau and things like this. You wouldn't believe it. Mexico, he writes about this beautifully, actually. And Mexico's the same thing.
I was going to say, what's interesting about these old buildings and that first floor, which is usually contemporary. I remember making a photograph once in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and there were two cars in front of the building, and somebody said, "I love this photograph, but those cars." I said, "Well, in 100 years, 100 years from now, they'll look really interesting."
Yeah.
It's sort of true of the first
Yeah.
floor, because the contemporary becomes more interesting with age, because I think photography to some extent is, photographers are basically historians, and we're recording things whether our intent was
Yeah, sure.
whatever our intent was, but what people are looking at what it looked like 100 years ago, and we do that now with old photographs, and people will do that with our photographs in the future. This portfolio of abstract photographs is over the last probably 20 years, I would think. It's a work in progress. I'm still making photographs for it. I think it's kind of will be a body of my life body of work of this. So it changes. The work I'm doing now, which is called Urban Luminosity, is firmly based in this abstraction notion of looking at things abstracted from reality with a frame around it to create its own context and to create its own sort of experience. But it's also, I'm finding myself in everything I've done, I've seen abstract. In the horse portraits I did, there are places like the blue robe you discussed earlier, there are places where I have an opportunity to include these beautiful abstract surfaces, or in Cuba or Vanishing America. Again, the walls are full in all those photographs of things that I could walk in and make an abstraction. So it's sort of like, and I think that the abstractions are getting stronger, and they're becoming less derivative of other artists, especially painters, sort of aesthetic and approach, i.e., I photographed walls that look like Rothko's. Now I think after 40 years, I'm starting to be my own painter. I'm starting to imitate myself. I'm starting to have my own specific voice of the abstractions.
One of the things they do is examine change, because these surfaces have been produced by nature and barbarism by people over a decade, maybe, or more than that. And some little act, a drip, it's persistent, makes a mark that a painter would die to have. There are things about all of those processes of decay, of rusting, that turn out qualities. And then once Michael sees the relationships of these things and the way certain colors fade into another richness, so you all you have to do is look at that, and you say, "Oh, that pink, my goodness!" Or going with this green, but the fact that they're there where they are, and have talk about competing with a painter. A painter can't get that. It takes 15 years of very slow action on this material to produce this. Gray-like, you know. So it affects both the color and the relationships. And also, of course, the space that you put them in. And suddenly these sort of solid objects melt into their qualities. It's ruinous to some philosophies, but it's just terrific.
Even though we live across the street, it's difficult for me to show Bill what I'm doing physically, because so much of what I do is negatives and scanning and on the computer, but we email back and forth. Our conversation, I think, began, or at least early on, was about me sending him photographs that I had made that weren't finished, but that were finished enough to send, and that were things that I was interested in. So Bill became an editor and a teacher, because I would send things, and you don't need, if you have this as your audience, Bill Gass, then you don't need a whole lot of other people. So he was writing back and responding to the things that I was doing, which was very helpful to me. And so over time we built, he had a lot of the images that I had sent him, and we had always talked about collaboration. So Bill started writing the essay, which it's just fantastic, blew me away, especially reading about the history of abstraction and his thoughts on it. But when he started writing about mine, it was like it was Christmas. Christmas for those hours. It was like opening up a present.
There is no Santa Claus.
No. You gave me a hell of a present. One thing we've done with the collaboration is never put any kind of, I always say, and he always says to me, just do what you want. Like when I went to Paris to photograph Rodin for this, he didn't say, well, you probably ought to think about this, that, and the other thing. And it's the same. I mean, it would be, the idea of telling Bill what to write is absurd. So there was a lot of respect in terms of passing the ball back and forth.
I don't think there were any nays on it at all.
Certainly easier to reach. It's certainly easier
Yeah.
to reach more people. That was I think that was the problem, was that we had a book that we had the publishing today, there are lots of books that people won't publish because they're not going to sell it. This is probably a prime example. But we wanted an audience for it. We did it on the kind of on-demand printing, and we printed 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah.
He had one, Bill had one, I had one. There were a few out there. But every time I showed the book, the response was always, how do I get one? And I'd say, well, if for $89, in which where we're making nothing, you can have a copy of it.
Yeah.
This is just more accessible.
Yeah, sure. That's been one of my aims all along. I always thought people have to see what Michael's doing. And this is, in any way that one can get that started, the better. And this is a way. Great.
I first saw Bill on a public television show where his photographs were the visual, and he was reading from the materials that he created from the photograph. And I thought it was, spectacular. That was my sort of first exposure to Bill and his photography and abstraction. And he was talking about a fountain and water, and he started going on and telling this kind of narrative. And I realized that so much of my photography was about that. In other words, taking a detail of something that had told a larger story. To me, that's the most successful, where it can work purely on a visual basis and also have some kind of narrative. Maybe it's not a clear narrative, but there are narrative elements to it that one can explore. So when I saw that program and watched it, I just thought, boy, this is this is exactly what I've been trying to do, but he put it into words. And I think in some ways, this 20-something year collaboration has been about that, where he's put words to my work, and maybe I've made photographs that illuminate his work. I think that's what a good collaboration is.
I just love what Michael does, and he's been doing all kinds of different things over a period of time, and I'm just astonished. And it's what makes life worth living, This is beauty being put into the world. I was always sort of in favor of that.